Alright, so since I'm a little more knowledgeable than I was 6 months ago, I have another list for Haiku. And what I'm talking about are systematic issues that are part of the reason why Haiku is not more widely adopted and used. Because my intent and my hope is that Haiku will be more widely adopted and used. Now, if you wonder, if there's any time I don't, mention a particular person in my list, that means I'm talking about you. No, actually, I'm not here to try to, I'm just really here to make suggestions and just say what, and I'm going to try to stick with that. What I think would help. And I do think that, unfortunately, I do think that there is more direction that's needed for Haiku in general. And anything in this world could run more efficiently and better, myself included. Make better choices or whatever. So, I hardly think that I've got all the best ideas. I hardly think that I've thought of everything. I've heard, and there could be some ways these things don't work out. But I'll mention it. I'm just going to mention what I think are the general things that are holding Haiku back. I'm going to just approach this from several different angles, because it really is a complex subject. We're talking about a tool that conceivably we would hope that anybody would be able to stick into their computer and it would be able to resolve their computer problem use case, whatever that may be. And that's a big target, and it takes a lot of coding to get that done. It takes a lot of work. Years have been put into this operating system. That's no small thing to just say, oh, well, forget about these guys, and that's partially why I'm here. I've kind of been frustrated out of feeling like I could help out much, actually. I made a little bit of progress, and there are a few applications people can actually use because of what I've done, but it certainly didn't go as far as I wanted it to, and there still are unanswered, open-ended problems that still exist in the application development area, and my only hope is to mention those things so they'll actually get solved. So I'm going to cover all sorts of issues: big picture issues, small issues, details, lack of details, theory, social, whatever. And what I think realistically happens. And the theme of this is going to be realism versus this is what we planned, this is what we want to do, and this makes sense. Why aren't people doing this? Which I think is a situation that some people that are working on the core part of the operating system are kind of going through. Like, okay, well, we thought about this. We put a lot of time into this. We really approach this as intelligently as we can. They are all, I'm not going to put words in their mouth, but I'm going to say they're smart people. That have worked hard and exercised what they thought in their own minds was in the best care of Haiku. So I don't want that to get lost in this whole discussion, but you suck. No, I'm kidding. No, I don't want that to get lost in this whole discussion. So, and yeah, I do joke around sometimes, but that's just me. So I guess I'll start from the top, and I'll also just talk about my own use case. And I think there's in some circumstances, people's use cases are not really being communicated. And I think it's, and this is not even on my list, but I think there's sometimes people don't speak about what their use case is. And by use case, I mean what the person, the potential Haiku user actually does with his computer on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully, the hope is that the operating system itself would be able to be diverse or flexible enough or useful enough to be able to accommodate diverse use cases, right? What I'm going to try to speak of are things that are going to be pretty much high bang for the buck use cases, factors that relate to use cases. I hope. Now, to me, what matters the most out of anything, the most important thing, are the end users, and the end users in case. And we're not talking about just just the developers, right? They are end users too. They do count, and they need to be able to do their job. But regular guys, guys like me that couldn't write C code if a gun was pointed to my head, also need to be able to use the OS. I'm going to try to stick to things that are within our control, that I think point back to some decision that we've made. And I'll probably also maybe add on some other things that really aren't in our control, but may be indicative as to whether one choice versus the other for the future may be better based on what we're seeing in general. So I'll start off like this. When B Inc. went out of business, I would say 32-bit computing wasn't really widely used until about 97, 98. B Inc. went out of business in 2003, and they weren't really talking about 64-bit computing until a good while later. I mean, argument, just for simplicity's sake, we'll just say 2010. Like a 6-7 year gap there, or whatever. We'll call it 5. Let's just call it 5. So when the project first, and this is going to happen again. This is what I'm going to describe is going to happen again for something I can't even imagine at this stage. So I'm not saying that the people should have been psychic 5 years prior to the arrival of 64-bit. That's ridiculous. So it's not. I'm not talking about this. I'm talking about in terms of what the future, what choices we can make for the future. The first thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to talk about the implications of not doing this, and I'm going to talk about an overall theme also. So it's very complicated, very, very muddy, intertwined, but this is my analysis of what's going on. So I'm going to say right now, we're not really coding for 64-bit, but we have it. And the but part is like, well, there's the upside. At least we thought it was a good idea to make 64-bit. When I boot into I just the first time, and I'll tell you right now, I should have used 64-bit the very first day I tried. And on the first day I should have tried to bootstrap package source. And when I would have found out it wouldn't have bootstrapped in 64-bit. And then. I don't know if I should have done that. I still did try to find some answers. So, but I had to do it in 32-bit because 64 is just not available. Anyway, when I boot into 64-bit, in fact, I'll just do this. I find one thing to be promising. I was wondering if this would be true. I'll just show it right now. It's not a real big deal, but I'll talk about the implications of it. So this says 64-bit says that there's I purposely allocated 6 gigs of memory to this virtual machine. It says there's 5. Okay, right there that tells me that our current operating system is able to handle more than 4 gigs of RAM in some fashion, generically. But when I say that we are not coding for 64-bit, I'm willing to guess that when we make our coding decisions for Haiku, there may be times that we're making choices that really only fit into a 32-bit world. Can't prove it, but I think it's probably true. There are some differences between the way you code things if it's 32-bit versus 64-bit. Now, I'm gonna deviate from my list here. I'm gonna talk about the overall social problem. That is that the people that have made the choices about this operating system have tried to accommodate too many diverse variables that could affect the ultimate way the operating system performs. Between 64 and 32 and GCC 2 and GCC 4, there's actually 4 different outcomes and possibly 4 different sets of binaries one could build for Haiku. And then, of course, we merge it together, which kind of, I would argue, really doesn't work. But at the end of the day, I think the patches are going to look different for... So you can't just say that, okay, this is the patch for Haiku. Now you have, possibly in some cases, patches for Haiku 64-bit that won't apply to Haiku 32-bit, and patches for GCC 4 that won't apply to GCC 2. Then, of course, the cross-section between those things, and, you know, now we could literally, if the same person were to try to port, 1,000 apps to Haiku to all 4 of those platforms, my guess is that the result would be that not all 4 sets of patches would be the same. Am I saying that we need to make 4 sets of patches for everything? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that we are, and it's not a matter, well, I like GCC 4 better, it's newer, so it's better. Or I just like 64-bit, but it's okay, these other guys can use 32-bit because they like that. It's not about that. It's about the day-to-day work that's required if and when you're actually developing for a system that has that kind of diversity. So if you're working on this and your installation happens to have GCC 4 32-bit, and you're patching something and you're fixing something as part of the OS, and you make a solution that works for that quadrant of the Haiku universe, it may not actually work in some other quadrant of the Haiku universe. So someone else comes by later and they're doing their own thing with their own 32-bit GCC2, and they find out that your stuff to them doesn't work. I'm tired of fixing this guy's crap patches. But they weren't crap patches. They were perfectly good. It was just in a different environment. That's what I'm talking about. And even if it's not between developers, between end users, your stuff that worked for this 25% use case isn't gonna, and someone else tries to, they'll file a bug. Instead of being the other developer, now they're gonna file a bug. This is screwed up. And then the guy that made the fix comes back and says, I can't reproduce. This is the reason why you just want to pick the best choice for the future of Haiku right now. And I'll explain why it's right now. Why we need to do this right now. I've already kind of gone over number 2. I will eventually get to why I think it's right now, but it should be, in fact, yeah, we're still on number 1. So, time goes by, older computers are going to be, computers are going to get older, they're eventually going to be removed from end users' desks and replaced by newer, shinier boxes that have the ability to run more complex software, and in turn the software vendors over time are going to add more complexity and more demands to the systems, and eventually 4 gigabytes of RAM simply is not going to be enough. In fact, for a business use case, if I were to imagine Haiku being used in the business I work in every day, and assume that the Haiku system is going to use the same kind of resources that a Windows system is going to use, that we currently do our work in, and assume that the apps that are compiled for Haiku, assuming we have all the same apps available to us for Haiku that we have for Windows, we can't use anything. We can't even imagine using an operating system that supplies anything below 4 gigabytes or 5 gigabytes of RAM. So on this matrix, there's only one that applies for us. And as time goes on, a larger portion of the population is going to be sucked out of the other 3 matrices of what's possible and placed firmly into the 64-bit box. More and more people will, over time, are going to need to be able to use 4 gigabytes of RAM, because they'll try to use a piece of software and it's going to ask for it. And that may trigger the desire to go out and buy a new computer. It kind of works in reverse, but it'll happen. And it already has happened. I'd say there's hardly anybody still, unless they're using an old computer that they would have thrown away to run Haiku on, just to see what it's like, but not to use every day, which is not what we want to accomplish. So that's why I say we need to do it now. It's just that simple. no end user population is going to be happy using applications that are 10 to 15 years old. Now, it's an over-exaggeration for the 4 gigabyte barrier, I do understand, but when you get back to GCC2 and the smaller builds as to where we are right now, that's kind of where we're lurking. I'll say 5 years. We'll say 5 years. Yeah, we'll say 5 years, because 32-bit was acceptable, obviously, in a world where hardware rarely ever passed the 4 gigabyte mark. Wow, you have 4 gigabytes of RAM? You got a mean machine there, buddy. 5 years ago or so. Maybe more than that. I'm being generous with the 5 years, actually. The same kind of confusion, I've already explained this. We don't support GCC4, but that's the best tool set for us to use. The fact of the matter is that even if we remove the scary alpha and the scary beta labels from Haiku, that doesn't mean the commercial vendors are going to come along and make apps for it. Look at Amiga. There probably is a current stable version of Amiga out there, but they're not going to get a wide variety of commercial vendors to come out and support it, such that any professional group, doctors, lawyers, or insurance agents, or auto dealers, or artists could say that we can use that segment of the population, can say that we can use that operating system because we have the applications that we need to do our job. At least until such point as apps are no longer developed, but they instead exist in the web, we're going to have RAM demands on our computers. It's just that simple. And who knows how much those browsers are going to ask for and how demanding, but it probably is going to be much lighter than having to install your own software, but we're not there yet. By any stretch of imagination, any platform. We're just crossing over the line as to where it's possible. But whether it's going to remain that way, it's unknown. So, between the 6432, the GC4, GC2, and the fact we've mandated the worst quadrant you can land in as official, the end result is that hardly anybody could really fit Haiku into their use case, even if they had all the apps they wanted. We're not even talking about applications. We're just talking about just basic, general usability. Is based with the 64-bit. I guess GC4 could, affect the use case, but between those things, we've cornered ourselves out of a lot of the market. We made ourselves irrelevant to most of the computer users out there. I want Haiku to be relevant, not irrelevant. And this is why I'm speaking up and saying what I'm saying. The next thing I want to say is, the next thing I have on my list is not really related, not as neatly packed and interrelated to other subjects, but it's part of the whole deal. Our file system really slows the system down. I went in, I copied the 40,000 files from package source into the 64-bit before I discovered it went Bootstrap. And that took 10 minutes for one. For two, I took a look at the the RAM that was being used. At the end of the copy job, it had a gigabyte of RAM that was used out of 6. 1 being unavailable, so I only had 4 left. And also getting back to a side note on the 64-bit, which is really no small thing. Now, apparently there is going to be some difference in coding between 32 and 64-bit. So we're going to have to redo some stuff, maybe do some kernel work to really get things to work as well as they can in the 64-bit environment. It's not just that it runs in 64-bit, but is it running as well as it can? At the end of the day, I saw real no performance difference between 64 and 32-bit Haiku. And I probably would get the same kernel crashes when configure scripts for KSH would run. But getting back to the file system, the fact that the file system is trying to act like a database just absolutely slows the damn thing to a crawl. The copy job was going at a rate of kilobytes a second. And quite frankly, most of the time, I'm not all that interested, and I think most end users aren't really all that interested in sending database queries into their file system to find out where a file is. You know, whether the search results may be a minute faster is irrelevant to the fact that the overall system is running sluggish constantly. You're in a much better position, in my belief, to have your search results take an extra minute, but your system to run way faster. And I could see it. I could watch, I could go into NetBSD and I could run a compilation, and I could see that it scrolls by a lot faster than it does in Haiku, for the most part, especially when files are getting extracted, and especially when files are being copied. Haiku slows to an absolute crawl. And if you're trying to do a very large project, I could probably finish in NetBSD in a week and a half. It would take me over a month just because of that one issue. But that's not all. So even if we had again, back to this, even if we had picked to go 64-bit all the way, and we had our code optimized for 64-bit, and we're using GCC4 such to ensure that 1, our patches are uniform, and 2, that we're using the same tool sets that current developers are using, and we'll get the results that that the people that make whatever projects that are out there are going to expect. If I were a current developer of any open source project, I would not decide to also check see if my source will build in GCC2. I just wouldn't bother with it. I would really only use one GCC to check to see whether my source built, and that would be GCC4. And whether the difference is minor or major, I have seen that it has made a difference in patching. So even if we had all the apps we wanted, we had our development was focused. We weren't having some people do some work and quietly doing some work for GCC4 because they know it's a better choice, but the leadership just won't listen to them. Even if we had those problems resolved, the fact that the system's so slow would turn people off. It's because the file system's trying to be a database. There's no reason for that. But for developers, not having hard links is one small annoyance amongst numerous that all add up just to make developing in Haiku just impossible of any significance beyond command line trinkets that come built with the operating system anyway. But then we've messed with the library pathing. We have this very strange library path. And we forced our users that if they're going to build anything by hand, they ever put it in one place. And this, quite frankly, has broken our build tool sets. I just know from experience in using package source that among the different compile tools that are out there and methodologies, and I'd say libtool is a methodology, while GCC or CMake or Clang are tools, different results come out of a system that tries to be uniform as much as it can, such as package source. Whether the R path is going to get embedded in some of the programs, it doesn't always happen. And it's not always going to happen in Haiku Porter. Am I saying that we need to go to one compile, just pick one compiler and only do that? No. What I am saying is that we need to fix the fact that we've broken the ability to path libraries in our system and give up whatever the hell is causing that, or change the source of whatever the hell is causing that. I have a feeling it's something small like PE, or if our kernel makes us do that, then we got to rethink our kernel. We need to be able to path our stuff the way, because POSIX is going to be the king in this operating system. And I'll get to that. We made the system read-only for absolutely no reason. There have been several issues that have come up because of that. And a lot of the time, the issues arise when you actually try to use a program that you've built. But sometimes it actually makes sense to make a change on your own system. See if it works better, and if it does, pass along the patch to the people that are developing the core of the system. That possibility has been completely eliminated for any end user that doesn't build his own system. I think it's unacceptable, and it stagnates the amount of help that the core developers get from the outside. But also makes a developer's life hell. He can't even decide that, well, maybe I won't be releasing patches this time, but at least I could build packages. It eliminates that possibility. We don't want that possibility eliminated. We don't want to narrow down use cases to a small, fine corner where no one will fit in. It makes the creation of the operating system absolutely pointless. There are some issues with linking, as far as I could tell. I'm not an expert at linking. I haven't had much feedback on this, but it sure does seem like Mesa, GlueGlut, and all those things will not link properly in Haiku. And there is evidence to show that those binaries are actually built in a Linux system or some other Unix-based system, probably Linux though. Then, even though we have close to complete headers, and we do mostly, or actually, yeah, mostly, because we don't have a shared memory header, we mostly correspond with what's in POSIX, but we do that to a fault. And I've mentioned this several times. We don't have compatibility patches or enhancements to our headers that will allow older things to build, and so developers end up making repetitive header includes, and it just, after a while, it just feels stupid. And that, the insult to the injury is the read-only file system and having no way to do anything about that. The good news is that the headers are close to complete. I don't think we need to do much, or mostly we need to do header includes. VA list has been solved, and really all that's left is a shared memory header, but that assumes that our kernel is able to handle shared memory, and I don't know if it can. Another one is, it's good news, bad news. Bad news is UEFI has taken over all the new machines anyway. And so Haiku's not even going to boot unless we support UEFI in some fashion. I'm not aware that we do. As far as I know, we don't. The good news is it's being worked on, and I'll say this. My belief is that the person that is working on the UEFI booting capability, because we're not using grub. I don't know what to call it. I have faith in that person's abilities. And the one assumption I am going to have with all this stuff is that I think that we are actually capable of making these changes and making things work very well. But specifically, I have a lot of faith in this individual's ability to get this UEFI done, even if they don't even think they can do it themselves. I think they can. But that is a threat. If you can't install Haiku on your computer, you're not going to use it. We probably wouldn't want to be stuck in VirtualBox as the only alternative. The next issue we've had is we made a decision to break working software repositories, and we haven't done anything to we've done that without an apparent good reason other than to protect the files that come with the system. Hardly anybody's going to mess with the files that come with the system. We aren't large enough to get viruses or malware. Just we're too small a target. There was no, so what I'm saying is there was absolutely no reason to make the package file system read-only. You want to have a package file system? Okay. Give the end users right access to that package file system. Because it's not just a package file system, it's actually a system file system. The only reason why I made my video to show how to break that and overcome the fact that the file system is read-only is because I do think developers need to have right access to their system. And end users need to have right access to their system. But that does stop us. But the main point of this point is not the fact that it's read-only. I've already mentioned that. It's the side effects from it. And this relates to another general point I have in another list. And that is, in general, our group tends to put theory above practice. So, there's and doesn't seem to be responsive to the request to change that implementation to accommodate more than just the use case that was imagined by the very intelligent and very skilled designer. It seems like we're too far off in this theoretical design land, and we've worked out in our minds how everything's gonna work, how it could work. It's not impossible. We can do it this way. Okay, we can come up with solutions. We did it that way. Oh boy, this is exciting. And coming up with the solutions and implementing them, that is exciting. But we're dealing with such a tool that has to scale across so many different use cases. You can't imagine them all. No matter how intelligent, if you're freaking Einstein, you're not going to imagine all the use cases. And sometimes the negative impacts on the use cases could be large enough that it has a very significant ripple effect upon the entire community. And that's what the package manager did when it broke the ability to install the software that people had worked on for years and collected and put into one place to give people applications they would want to use and enable them to be able to use Haiku, because that's what the point is to make something for people to use, not to tell people that they have something but they have to use it the way we say or they can just go to hell, which is the message that comes across whether that's intended or not, because that's the factual way things have broken out. So the end result, the side effect of having broken the software repositories and not done anything to rectify the situation that's significant, other than come back and argue with the people that make the complaints, is that the developers left for that reason. I mean, there's 3 things that developers are going to do. They're either going to decide they're going to not doing 64-bit, not using GCC4 alone is going to get rid of, I would say, 90% of the development prospects that would even come by. Of the remaining 10, some might want to work from within and decide they're going to just use GCC4 anyway because they think it's a bad idea, or just use 64-bit anyway, but of the people that don't happen, a lot of those people aren't going to make it very high up in the ladder because eventually people are going to find out what they're doing. A lot of the developers just don't even come, and if they do, they end up getting frustrated away. And the end result is a mixed bag of Haiku that's been developed over 4 uneven quadrants. The next issue I think we have is that I am completely unclear as to how much hardware our kernel is going to support. At the end of the day, hardware matters. It matters if you can attach a scanner to your computer, a camera to your computer, a microphone, a smartphone, a USB card, a USB stick. All those things matter. And I am just about ready to say that our kernel's not going to support a lot of the hardware, just based upon what I know about other operating systems. It doesn't necessarily make it true, but I'm pretty sure that we're not even going to be able to support some chipsets just for certain bare bones computers, that you just go out and buy. So even if we had we had used 64-bit, we're using all the RAM, we're able to boot, we're coding consistently for 64-bit, we're coding consistently for GCC4, we've opened up the read-only file system, developers have come back, even under all those circumstances, and the UFEI issue has been resolved. If we don't have drivers, or enough drivers to actually get things to work, to run properly on most of the hardware that's coming out today, none of those other things will matter. If it is going to take a lot of developer time and energy, such as to the extent that we actually have to keep hardware lists, which is the conclusion the community seems to arrive at, it begs another question that I will get to. And that's basically, Well, I'll get to that after I talk a little bit more. We also don't have a native X11 binding, and newsflash, we did have an advantage back in 2003, 2004, having this kind of window user interface. Even 2008, people were still very frustrated with the way X11 was. X11 has matured so much to the point that unless, I mean, basically the only way to ensure that you have some graphical problems in Linux is if you have some kind of AMD card and your distribution you choose decides not to ship that with it. If the Linux distributions decided to ship AMD drivers with their distro and not make people add repositories from a black screen shell that looks like a 1980s Unix terminal, most of the issues with X would be gone by now. But getting back to our thing, we don't really have a way to. There's a large slice of applications that simply want to use X11. We have a good way to get SDL apps to work, but we do not have a good way to get X11 apps to work. And without that, we're just cutting ourselves off from application choice, and we're narrowing our end user use cases. So right now, even though in the day it seemed like it was an advantage to have the app server running, I would say overall it's a disadvantage. I do like the interface, but not tremendously much more than I like, say, KDE3. The last item I have listed here is that our kernel doesn't support shared memory that all the graphical POSIX programs want. Why do I keep talking about POSIX? Another thing I should add that I didn't have written down on my list is that basically the writing's on the wall. We can see from what has happened over the last 6 years since Haiku is actually installable and usable, at least in VirtualBox and on various machines, that there aren't a lot of takers on people that want to write code for the Haiku API. What I say is we should accept that and not worry about maintaining the Haiku API. In fact, we shouldn't worry about it if we lose it. But if we want to keep it, someone could work on it, but it probably won't be a very valuable project, in my opinion. And so what that really leads me to is what is Haiku really today? And do we have to have a system in which we're overwhelmed by the number of tasks that need to be done to maintain the kernel, that need to be done to maintain drivers, the list is going to be too large and the number of developers too small. And the enthusiasm is gone. The communities, there are still some people that are sticking around. They sure do believe in the system. They sure want to defend it. And they sure don't like it when people say anything negative about it. And they still believe something's going to happen with it. As time goes on, that becomes less and less real. There's just a lot of people that just aren't really working on the system anymore. The urgency to get a recreation done to replace BEOS is not there, from what I've seen. The end result in what we have today and what it looks like it's going to be for a long time to come is that we have a system that has a unique interface and has the ability, limited ability. In fact, that ability may have actually been lost to run some older B apps. It's not a complete. We don't even have a complete API compatibility. We have, but close. So what would be the difference if we booted with a different kernel that had the same API compatibility and was able to display the same window manager? What are the costs and benefits of that? I think really is a time to seriously look at that. Well, you know, there's Zevin OS out there and other people have tried it. Well, you just, you know, BUS, I think, is all about using that exact window manager. If you're not using that exact window manager, it's not BUS, it's something else. But in general, in theory, if we were able to take that window manager and the API with us somewhere else to a place where we wouldn't have to maintain a kernel, that POSIX compatibility wouldn't be a pipe dream or something we'd have to work hard for. It would be a reality we already have. Things would be a lot easier for a lot of people. It's just that simple. Well, I worked so hard in collecting these patches all these years, and I worked so hard on Haiku Porter. Just get a look at the writing on the wall. I mean, it's been 4 years since, there's only been a few people, a handful of people that are making Haiku packages for public consumption that doesn't go through Haiku Depot, and there aren't a lot of things there in Haiku Depot. There really aren't. I'm asking people to make more stuff on Haiku Depot. No, I'm just being realistic about the number of people we actually have. And at the end of the day, what we really need is a place that we can run apps. A place that has the BE API enabled, and is very, very close. I mean, you can't even tell any difference between it and what Haiku does today on the user interface. And if we have that, there's a whole bunch of stuff we just don't need to do anymore. Like the kernel, like the package manager, like the file system, because we're never going to get around to that. Proposed improvements to the B file system has been up on the site for 5 years. Hardware support, Wi-Fi. It's just not going anywhere. So people that were once B users aren't using B anymore. They're using something else. They just don't have a place to go back to. If you want them to have a place to go back to, it's time to pick a kernel and get the app server ported to it and the other components and the API ported to that kernel. And not to make our own file system, just get rid of the B file system. If B were resurrected as a company today, and it had to do what was right and best for its own sales to survive as a company, and they realized that there was a number of file systems out there that are gratis that they could choose from, they wouldn't put any money into getting the B file system fixed so that hard links were supported and it was fully capable like other files, because it affects development. I'll just be flat out honest. It makes development a fucking nightmare. Or it's part of the overall mix of things that make it a nightmare. whatever company would make BOS wouldn't want to put a lot of money into enhancing headers and testing to see how a wide array of, it's a 6-month project to test a wide variety of POSIX. But they would see the writing on the wall that POSIX is the only way to go. And POSIX needs to be the primary compatibility, and BE API the secondary, because that's the way things have gone. Even look historically, if you go to the Haiku site, the apps you want to use were ones that came out of POSIX. The apps that you don't necessarily want to use are the ones that came out of the BE API. What's lost by moving to another system? Well, we would have to trust that whatever kernel we picked would allow it. We wouldn't want to fork, and we're forking a lot of our projects. We're actually, in the situation that we're ending up forking library USB. We forked Mesa. The list goes on, and it keeps growing, and it gets too large for our group to maintain and deal with. And even if we got all that stuff right, which is way above our capabilities and over our head, so if we want to be happy about what we've done, we can still have a package manager if we were housed in a different kernel. There's nothing that says a Linux machine couldn't look and act like Haiku and do better at it. If we just used XFS, got that app server and the other servers ported over to the interface, we're done. And the code's mostly written anyway. Get the B file system driver into the Linux kernel and get it so it isn't experimental and it has write access, and we're good. And make it so that you can have one partition without the hard links and another one with them. So it won't break anything. It doesn't have to be an either or choice. So in my mind, what B is the user interface and the ability to run that API. And fast boot, all the other OSs now have a fast boot. Haiku has a fast boot, Windows has a fast boot. So we haven't lost a fast boot by doing that. We gain the ability to browse the network. We gain kernel support for multiple pieces of hardware. There's just numerous, and we gain wine. We won't have all these issues with porting things. There's so much upside and so little downside to moving to a different platform. It just doesn't really make any sense to stay doing what we're doing, because we're not getting anywhere. We haven't really made, it sounded like we were going to have a better slice of pie. Now, there are some annoyances with Linux, but those have become less and less rare. Like for now, for example, this camera program I'm using, every once in a while, over a few versions or so, I have some issues with it. Sometimes it doesn't really want to start up right away, or now it wants to say I can't have a recording that's larger than 2 gigabytes, and I better check. So if I've gone over 2 gigabytes, I've just wasted all this time. Isn't that great? But no, not even close. Also has to do with the settings. In general, I think there were technical issues that hold Haiku back and social issues that hold Haiku back. I think the social issues are that the current user base, or the past user base, imagined that the core developers were going to be doing things that they actually didn't end up doing. Ended up being surprised by that. Ended up arguing with people about things in support of things that weren't really true. Where they got these impressions from, so you don't fault the developers for them. But also part of the social problem that we have is the developers are overworked. They've had to do some really miraculous things, and they haven't. So any kind of criticism just kind of is a big blow. So I'm not doing this as a big blow. And if we wanted to, we can bring our package manager over to Linux as well. I don't see why we couldn't. But please, don't try to make the damn thing read-only. It didn't make any sense. So what I'm saying is Haiku's dead, but long live Haiku. What is needed is a group of people to work on in the API. Getting the API into whatever kernel we pick to go to. Getting the file system integrated into whatever kernel we go to. And keeping our package manager maintained. And perhaps developing Haiku ports. But there's no reason to stunt. Sorry to say, but the headers are stunted compared to other systems. There's no reason to really stunt that. So, you know, whatever. If someone wants to use the Haiku package manager, they should be able to do that. They should be allowed to do that. But also in Linux systems, people have other choices and won't be forced. If you're going to use this system, it's got to go this way. And then the things that we work on, we won't be sitting here trying to get, GCC to work. It's just going to be there and work, because someone would have worked on it already. And I think the side effects of having made choices that are clearly not going to work for most people, it makes no sense to have all your apps built with GCC2 on a 32-bit platform. In general, for most use cases, as I've already explained. So what ends up happening with that is there's going to be some people that are quietly going to work within the system, but they're just going to do things their way. Which isn't bad, in my opinion. Everybody should be doing things that other way that makes more sense. It's just that the mandate will cause some people not to do things the way they should be done, in my opinion, 64-bit GCC4, and you get the mixed results, you get the unstable system. I don't know how much work it would take to add good shared memory support to the kernel that we have right now. But part of the social problem that we have is just the environment that we're in. If it's too restrictive, if we cut off a lot of our options with our engineering choices, approving of them based upon the fact that, well, if we do all these, if we have our end users go through this complicated mental exercise that we have that shows that clearly what we've planned is possible, if they don't do that, then they just can't do anything they want with the system. If everybody has to step and do things in exactly one particular way, or everything's going to break, then you're dealing with that tightly wound circumstance is energy draining in and of itself, amongst other things. Well, I think I've talked about everything I'm going to talk about and can do. I've already made this 64-bit Haiku machine, but I've realized right now it isn't really any faster. And to my mind, it's clearly because we haven't really written our Haiku code to be 64-bit. And the file system is just slowest things to a crawl. I can't even bootstrap So I'm pretty much done here. I was, despite all the clear evidence that it was impossible to port apps to this OS, I tried. It was damn frustrating, and I tried to humor my way through it at times, but you know, at the end of the day, it's a dead end. My hope, with at least the things that I've outlined, that some of these things will actually happen. If we're going to stay in Haiku, we need a lot of kernel engineers, and we somehow have to figure out a way to get people motivated. The number of people that were there in the beginning, we need to get all those people back and get them working on the kernel to get shared memory in there. Good 64-bit support if it's not there already. We need people to fix the file system, and we need to get these things done in a reasonably quick time. I'm talking 1 to 2 years to have any chance. Otherwise, we just need to have the people that are working on the current project now moving on over to another Linux system. And don't call it Linux, call it Haiku. Continue to call the damn thing Haiku. And give people the ability to choose what kernel they want to boot into, if they want. If they want to boot into the legacy kernel, they can, but fix those hard links. Unlock the file system. Fix the library path. Because they're broken. And if you don't like it, I'm sorry, I'm not here to hurt anybody's feelings, but that's a matter of fact. It doesn't scale that well. There's a reason why we're the only project that has put the little percentage A in front of our library path. There's a reason why we're probably the only operating system that requires hand-compiled binaries to rest in some directory or they won't work. So that's the deal. And you know what? From my point of view, the current group that's working on Haiku, so what? Mistakes were made. I still think the group is capable. So there. And I like the group too. I think you're capable. Just go fix it. Yeah, you're human beings. We're all human beings. Just go back, fix it. Move on. Doesn't make you any less. In fact, it makes you better. At least in my eyes. So I hope the best for this OS. I hope to come back in a year or two and find that the community's been revitalized, the doors are open, people's ideas are accepted, their criticisms are taken seriously, and the complaints are dealt with enhancements and not rebuttals. And that's very, very important. And or that we've made just a stark realistic choice to start using a different, and I've come to this conclusion after I've been through all the things I've been. 2 months ago, I would say I don't care about the kernel. I trust that the people are in, but it's not a matter of just trusting the core developers. It's a matter really of having the manpower and not having a group of developers that are working on the system feeling so overwhelmed that the idea of working on the operating system stresses them out to the point where they can't continue. Getting stuck in that mire doesn't help the community of BOS users that want to see a viable platform survive. But I will say that if we do this move, which I am proposing and I'm advocating, I don't care what kernel it is, but I really do think it should be Linux just because there's more support there for everything. However, if we do this, it's got to be a smooth transition. You know, so if we're going to have a alternate kernel version of Haiku up there, then we let it develop until it can do everything our original can do, and until such time we don't switch it as being primary. Maybe primary of what we work on, and maybe the future of what we're going to do. But, and you know what? The kernel, there's a lot. You can turn a lot of things off and on in the Linux kernel. You can make one that's a kernel that's designed for a desktop. You can make a kernel that's designed for whatever. It opens up a lot of possibilities for the system and will solve a lot of problems. And I have every confidence in the leading coders in our group to be able to get things accepted into whatever, as patches into whatever kernel, for the ABI, to be able to turn off or on the ABI for B or Haiku. I am absolutely confident that our guys are good enough, smart enough, and gosh darn it, the maintainers are going to like you, because we have done a lot with the little resources that we have. I'm just saying that it isn't enough. I don't like seeing those energies go to waste, and I think a lot of the code that we've written can be reused. I'm hoping it can be reused. After all, a kernel's just a kernel, and somehow we've been able to get our window manager to start up. So there you are. That's my opinion, and that's where I'm at today. I'm at this point, I'm really not even. I was a little curious to install 64-bit Haiku, but that was it. I'm frustrated out of it. Because I know at the end of the day, I'm just not going to get very far. But, there are some games I got up there, some patches, and that has a lot to do with my not being able to code. But it also has a lot to do with the limitations that the system has. I think things just don't run that well. And a lot of the POSIX applications in our environment need very extensive rewrites that aren't apparent just by errors that come up when you try to build things. That's my overall assessment of our POSIX compatibility layer, in between the read-only file system and the lack of user directory. We barely have POSIX compatibility of any significance other than command line tools, in my opinion. Alright, that's it.